So they never had to deal with audience that would walk out if they heard any kind of Spanish. They would go to the Comédie Française and sit there through all the French and yada yada. They would go to whatever in a foreign language. Don't you give me those Spanish speakers up on that stage. Sure. I mean, we encountered that all the time where people were very offended. Why are you excluding us? When in fact the poor playwrights had gone to the trouble of saying, you know, si tú me preguntas, ¿cómo te llamas? And I say, my name is Jorge. Doesn't that infer that the question was, what is your name? Not, do you want to marry me? You know what I mean? So we've had that to deal with. We have had to deal with audiences who don't like the bilinguality of our
I think that's still an issue.
I know it is.
That's a huge, like you say, we could take any language, it seems, except Spanish. And the minute, we did 14 by Jose Casas, and he had 2 monologues in Spanish. And the other 15 monologues, because there wasn't 14 monologues, were in English. And the biggest complaint always across the board was, we love the play, but why are those 2 in Spanish? I wish they were in English. And I understand that they want to understand. And Jose has a great response, and he says, because my mother, I wrote it for my mother to understand. She doesn't understand English. She understands Spanish. And that's why, and if you have a problem, you know, F you. that's Jose, you know. He's but I noticed that every time, and there's this weird, this weirdness that people, they always ask, oh, do you do plays in English? It's like, well, I'm speaking to you in English. Why would you assume that I don't do plays in English? It's very interesting, but that seems to be always the problem with the Spanish language. And like you said, everywhere else, super titles, go see an opera, super titles, we don't care. I don't understand.
If you have an Italian opera and you translate it.
I don't understand. Anyways.
I think it's historical racism. You know, I've stopped using the R word. Nobody wants to believe that they're racist, and we all have, our culture is rife with racist tendencies, but I call it cultural insensitivity. And so, you know, there's a lot of cultural insensitivity, but there's also animosity. They're afraid of us. They're afraid of us. They see us growing. Now, the recent numbers indicated that the Asian population is growing faster than us. Who knew? I didn't know they were Catholic. And so, so now we got some competition, but they got a long way to go to catch up with Latinos and Latinos.
We still take care of their babies.
I think you need another question.
I have another question. One more thing about this this recent gathering of Latinos at the LATC. We broke off into groups, right? And I was in the international group.
Mm-hmm.
And then there seemed to be a big consensus that we had so much to learn from the Latin Americans in theater. That was the general question. I don't know. I feel that way too in some sense, because whenever I see the Chilenos, the Argentinians, right? I saw Diciembre and a few of the, and they're, I don't know, they have something, right? And then that's what we kind of talked about. Like, can you speak to that a little bit, like about some differences, or why does it? And this is just an opinion, but why does it seem like they're able to deal with the politics in their place in such a more successful way, to me, anyways? What do you think about that?
Well, there's historically, I mean, okay, so I grew up in the 40s and 50s being called a pocho by my Mexican cousins in Tijuana or Mexicans in Mexico in the interior. It was a pejorative term, you know, it's like the N-word, it's like wetback. And so there's always been a distrust, there had been, okay, of los que se fueron al norte, los que desaparecieron, you know, and they chose to leave and never come back. Okay, so you fled the conflicts of the revolution between 1910 and 1920, and then you stayed. And so we were the outcasts, right? And we were a working class people. You know, we fled the people. My father came across in the circus band. I mean, we were not the bourgeois, right? Historically, and the Chicano movement was totally a working class movement. There were no bourgeois Mexican Americans in Mecha, anywhere in this country. You know, they just went into some other field. They certainly didn't go into theater, and they didn't go into our theater. So there's always been from Mexico to this side, okay? Then you go south, you keep going south, and those people have centuries of their own culture. They think, well, what about you? What about your? But we don't have that. It hasn't been taught to us, right? So we don't have that sense of identity. And all of Latin America has been through an identity crisis since those white people landed with their beards in 1492. You know, all Latin Americans suffer from an identity crisis, which is why they go for the Brechtian, which is why they go for the absurd, you know, the absurdists, etc., etc. But to me, it's elitist. It's a bit elitist. Now, in 1974, we have our Quinto Festival de los Teatros Chicanos, Primer Encuentro Latinoamericano in Mexico City. 35 Chicano theater groups, and as well as East Coast, Latino and Puerto Rican groups, go to Mexico City. 17 Latin American theater companies come up to Mexico City. It's an incredible event, 2 weeks. And in the middle of it, Luis Valdez's Teatro Campesino presented what I consider their collective opus magnus, La Gran